Welcome to our Sunday School Bible Study time here at Southwest Park Baptist Church. This is our lesson for Sunday, November the 3rd. We're starting a new unit of study. This is our final unit of study in this quarter. It's entitled Struggles of Faith. This week our lesson's entitled Jacob Manipulated Esau. We're in the 25th chapter of Genesis. As we begin this 4-week unit, we pick up the second half of Genesis, which details the fulfillment of God's covenant promise to Abraham through the lives of Abraham's offspring, starting with Isaac. And as we've studied a little bit about Isaac last week, Isaac was the son of a famous father, Abraham, and the father of a famous son, Jacob. So for those reasons, he's sometimes considered a lightweight among the patriarchs. He doesn't get near as much press as Abraham and Jacob. And compared to them, his life does seem a little bit conventional and commonplace. He lived longer than either Abraham or Jacob, but we only have 6 chapters devoted to Isaac's life. So he comes across as a quiet man who would rather pack up and leave than confront his enemies. During his long life, he didn't travel very far from home. Abraham had made the long journey from Haran to Canaan, had visited Egypt. Jacob went to Haran, as we'll study next week, to get a wife. But Isaac spent his entire adult life just moving around in the land of Canaan. But as Warren Wiersbe points out in his commentary, there are more Isaacs in the world than there are Abrahams or Jacobs. And these people make important contributions to society and to the church, even if they don't see their name in lights. Furthermore, Isaac was a living part of the divine plan that eventually produced the Jewish nation that gave us the Bible and brought Jesus Christ into the world. And we will see that in our lesson today. So Isaac wasn't a failure, he's just different. After all, the people in each generation have to find themselves and be themselves and not spend their lives trying to imitate their ancestors. Men are born equal, wrote psychiatrist Eric Fromm in Escape from Freedom, but they are also born different. Discovering our uniqueness and using it to the glory of God is a challenge for us, and that's what we're supposed to be about. Why be a cheap imitation when we can be a valuable original? And that's a timely reminder for each one of us that even though we may be very different, we have an important role to play in God's plan. As chapter 25 opens, it tells us that Abraham again took a wife, and her name was Keturah, and then it lists the 6 sons that were born to Keturah, and here she's called Abraham's wife. In 1 Chronicles chapter 1, she's called a concubine. So scholars have discussed and debated whether she's actually a wife or a concubine. Regardless, she had children by Abraham. Midian is one we recognize, and as we study about Joseph, we'll encounter the Midianites as some traders there in that area. Verse 5 and 6 tell us that Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but he gave gifts to the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, and I'm assuming that includes these sons of Keturah. And while he was still living, he sent them eastward, away from Isaac his son, to the country of the east. So again, we see the emphasis on Isaac as the son of promise here. Verses 7 through 11 detailed the death of Abraham. He was 175 years old. He died. He was buried with Sarah in the cave of Machpelah. We studied about that last week there. Ishmael was there for his funeral. And following right on that account of the burial of Abraham, we have a genealogy of Ishmael. He had 12 sons there, and we remember the promise that God had made to Hagar and to Abraham that Ishmael would be the father of a nation there. It tells us that Ishmael lived 137 years, and he died there, and died in the presence of his brethren. So that brings us down to verse 20, where we pick up with our focal passage today. Our first point, God's ways are higher than our ways. Genesis 25, verses 20 through 26. Isaac was 40 years old when he took as his wife Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Padan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord was receptive to his prayer, and his wife Rebekah conceived. But the children inside her struggled with each other, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, two peoples will come from you and be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." And when her time came to give birth, there were indeed twins in her womb. The first came out red looking, covered with hair like a fur coat, and they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out grasping Esau's heel with his hand, so he was named Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. Isaac was 40 years old when he took a wife, and we studied about that last week, how God selected Rebekah to be his wife. And we have every reason to believe from the accounts we read that they were devoted to the Lord, devoted to each other. The record indicates that Rebekah's more aggressive than Isaac when it came to family matters, but maybe that's the kind of wife that Isaac needed. Like Sarah, Rebekah was barren, and like Abraham, Isaac prayed for his wife, and the Lord answered, and she bore 2 sons. The barrenness of both Sarah and Rebekah, as well as Rachel and Leah, reiterates the point, it emphasizes the point that the promised blessing through the chosen seed of Abraham is not to be accomplished just through human effort. The fulfillment at each juncture along the way requires a specific act of God, and we see that in their barrenness. Warren Wiersbe says, like Abraham, Isaac was a man of prayer, so he interceded with the Lord on behalf of Rebekah. Isaac had every right to ask God for children because of the covenant promises the Lord had made to his father and mother, promises Isaac had heard repeated in his family and that he believed. And so if Rebekah remained childless, how could Abraham's seed multiply? as the dust of the earth and the stars of heaven, as is recorded for us. So Isaac prayed. And it's, as Brother Wearsby points out, it's been well said that the purpose of prayer is not to get our will done in heaven, but to get God's will done on earth. And even though every Jewish couple wanted children, Isaac wasn't praying selfishly here. He's concerned that God's plan be fulfilled and the whole world be blessed through the promised Messiah. The Lord answered Isaac's prayer and enabled Rebekah to conceive. Verse 22 tells us that she had a difficult pregnancy. The babies in her womb were struggling with each other, and the Hebrew word that's used there means to crush or oppress, and it suggests that these movements were not normal. And since Rebekah wondered by this if the Lord was trying to say something to her, she went to inquire. Isaac was fortunate to have a wife who not only knew how to pray, but wanted to understand God's will for herself and her children. We see here a central theme of Genesis as well, the struggle between brothers that occurs here even in the womb. The conflict between brothers began with Cain and Abel, and it continues throughout the book. The point of that is not so much that the struggles were necessary for the accomplishment of God's will, but that God's will was accomplished in spite of those conflicts. Well, we can imagine Rebekah's surprise when the Lord revealed to her that the two children would struggle all their lives. Each child would produce a nation, and these two nations, Edom and Israel, would compete, but the younger would master the older. Just as God had chosen Isaac, the second son, and not Ishmael, the first son, so he chose Jacob, the second son, and not Esau, the firstborn. That the younger son should rule the older was contrary to tradition and really contrary to logic. But the sovereign God made the choice. As Paul says in Romans 9, verses 10 through 12, this son was our ancestor Isaac. When he married Rebekah, she gave birth to twins, but before they were born, before they had done anything good or bad, she received a message from God. This message shows that God chooses people according to his own purposes. He calls people, but not according to their good or bad works. She was told, your older son will serve your younger son. That's an important motif throughout Genesis. From chapter 4 on, the narrative has portrayed God choosing and approving the younger and weaker through whom he would accomplish his purpose and bring about his blessing. So his blessing was not a natural right, but was extended solely and completely by God's grace. Well, as we read on, we find that when her time came to give birth, she indeed had twins. And Esau was the firstborn, and when he came out, he's red and he's covered with red hair, and so they named him Esau. I think Esau means hairy. He also had the nickname Edom, which means red, probably a reference to his red hair, but as we'll see later on in our study, he got that nickname when Jacob prepared some red stew that led to him losing his birthright. After this, the younger brother was born, and he was named Jacob. And the name Jacob comes from a Hebrew word that means may God protect, something like that. But it sounds like, the Hebrew word sounds like the word for heal and watch from behind or overtake. And so his name kind of became a nickname. He grasped the heel, or he deceives, because as we're told, he came out grasping Esau's heel. So before birth, Jacob and Esau contended. At birth, Jacob grasped his brother's heel, and their whole life was marred by conflict. Warren Wiersbe, talking about the significance of the names, says King Solomon said, a good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of one's birth. Now, he didn't say that death's better than birth, for after all, we have to be born before we can die. But Solomon's point was that the name given to you at birth is like a fragrant ointment, and you have to keep it that way until you die. When you received your name at birth, nobody knows what you're going to make of it. But at death, that name is either fragrant or putrid. If it's fragrant at death, people can rejoice. But nothing can change it there. So that's what he means for a person with a good name. The day of death is better than the day of birth, because that good name lives on. The names of Abraham and Sarah were fragrant in life, and as we continue our study, we're going to see what Esau and Jacob made of their names. The author tells us that Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. You might wonder, did Abraham live to see his grandchildren born? And the answer is yes, he did. They would have been 15 years old when Abraham died, even though the record here in chapter 25 has the account of his death and burial before the birth of these grandchildren. So we don't know anything about his relationship with them, but they were 15 years old when he died. Our second point, our ways are not God's ways, but sinful. Genesis 25, verses 27 through 34. When the boys grew up, Esau became an expert hunter, an outdoorsman. But Jacob was a quiet man who stayed at home. Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for wild game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking a stew, Esau came in from the field exhausted, and he said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff because I'm exhausted." That's why he was also named Edom. Jacob replied, "First, sell me your birthright." "Look," said Esau, "I'm about to die, so what good is a birthright to me?" And Jacob said, "Swear to me first." And so he swore to Jacob and sold his birthright to him. And then Jacob gave bread and lentil stew to Esau. He ate, drank, got up, and went away. So Esau despised his birthright. As the boys grew up, they were very different. Esau turned into an outdoorsman, a skillful hunter. Jacob was more an indoor type, dwelling in tents. And the differences in the boys, it seems, led Isaac and Rebekah to have favorites. Isaac loved Esau because he liked the wild game that he hunted and brought him to eat. Rebekah loved Jacob here. So these two verses emphasize the contrasting personalities of Esau and Jacob as they grew up here. And that led to this parental favoritism, and that played a significant role in the dynamics of the family and the unfolding of future events. And we'll mention that here in a little bit as we go on. It also highlights the different values of the two brothers, and that kind of sets the stage for their complex relationship, and we'll see a little bit of that as we go through this. In verse 29, Jacob was cooking this lentil stew when Esau returned from hunting, and that led to the famous incident, the very well-known incident of Esau selling his birthright. The Bible doesn't provide us with a specific reason why Jacob was cooking this stew at that point in time, but there's a Jewish tradition that connects Abraham's death with Jacob preparing this lentil stew. According to this tradition, Jacob was cooking the lentil stew as a mourner's meal for his father Isaac, who was grieving the death of Abraham. Lentils are considered a traditional food for mourning in Jewish culture because their round shape symbolizes the circle of life and death. Now, whether that certainly is not supported by Scripture, but it's a Jewish tradition. The lentils are legumes, and apparently there are different colors of them. So here Jacob is cooking red ones to make this stew. In the broader context of this story, though, his preparation of the stew it provides a moment of opportunity. Jacob wanted the birthright. He valued the birthright for its significance, and he seized this opportunity to negotiate with Esau. Esau is more focused on the here and now, satisfying his immediate needs here. It contrasts the priorities of the two brothers here. And so Esau said to Jacob, "Give me some of that red stuff because I'm hungry and tired." And as Moses records for us, that's why he's named Edom, which means red, and he's the father of the Edomites, who are a constant foe of the Israelites as we study on. Jacob says, "First, sell me your birthright." In biblical times, the birthright was a significant honor and responsibility that was given to the firstborn son in a family. There are several aspects of the birthright. The owner of the birthright, the eldest son, got a double portion of the inheritance. So he inherited twice as much as any of the other sons. The firstborn son often became the head of the family or tribe after the death of his father, taking on leadership and decision-making responsibilities and opportunities. In some cases, the birthright included some spiritual responsibilities there, such as being the family priest before the Levites came along. And it also involved receiving the father's blessing, which was a formal declaration of inheritance and future prosperity. Well, verse 32 shows us Esau's mindset. I'm about to die, so what good is a birthright to me? Now, almost certainly that's an exaggeration on his part, but it reveals his disdain for the birthright. He didn't see it as that important. His decision to sell his birthright for a bowl of stew is often seen as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing immediate gratification over longer-term blessings and responsibilities. And it kind of emphasizes the importance of valuing spiritual heritage and making thoughtful decisions. Jacob made him swear. He said, "Swear to me first." That formal oath, even though it's not witnessed by anyone else, would have been regarded as binding by both parties. And so Esau did that. He swore to Jacob, sold his birthright to him. And then Jacob gave bread and lentil stew to Esau, and he satisfied his hunger. He ate, drank, and got up and went away. And as Moses tells us, Esau despised his birthright. That word that's translated despise there implies utter contempt. Esau scorned God's promise given to the heirs of Isaac. Now, the narrator here, Moses, doesn't explicitly denounce Esau for selling his birthright. He doesn't commend Jacob for getting it by taking advantage of him here. But the writer of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 12, probably gives us the best commentary on Esau's attitude here. Starting in verse 16, he says, "Make sure that no one is immoral or godless like Esau, who traded his birthright as the firstborn son for a single meal. You know that afterward, when he wanted his father's blessing, he was rejected. It was too late for repentance, even though he begged with bitter tears." That's where our focal passage ends there. But as we move into chapter 26 next week, we're going to be studying about Jacob, and so we need to cover some ground here to kind of lead into next week's lesson. Chapter 26 goes back to Isaac here. And tells us there was a famine in the land besides the famine that we read about during Abraham's time. And Isaac went to Gerar. That's close to Gaza, just a few miles from Gaza. And there the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land which I'll tell you. Dwell in the land, and I'll be with you and bless you. For to you and your descendants I give all these lands, and I will perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father. And I will make your descendants multiply as the stars of heaven. I will give to your descendants all these lands, and in your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, my laws." And so here we see the promise extended to Isaac. Well, Isaac dwelt there in Gerar, and he pulled the same stunt that Abraham pulled in Egypt by passing Rebekah off as his sister rather than his wife, because he was afraid, because she was beautiful, they'd kill him and take her. Now, fortunately, she did not become a part of the king's harem. The deception was found out, and Isaac was chastised there. But it goes on to tell us that he was very prosperous in the land, and he became very, very wealthy. And the Philistines, and that's in Philistine territory, they envied him, and they had stopped up the wells there, and so the king asked him to leave. And he did there. And the quarreling continued between his herdsmen and the Philistines here. And again, God came to him in verse 24. The Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I'm the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I'll bless you and multiply your descendants for my servant Abraham's sake. And after that, Abimelech, the king of Gerar, came and made a treaty with Isaac. And so he was able to live peacefully in the land there and prosper. Chapter 26 ends with when Esau was 40 years old, he took as wives Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. And they were a grief of mind to Isaac and Rebekah. So keep that in mind, that at 40 Esau married 2 Hittite women. And immediately that began to cause issues. Well, chapter 27 is that very familiar story where Isaac is old, he's almost blind, he can't see well, and he called Esau and he said, I'm old, I don't know how much longer I'm going to live. Take your weapons, go hunt some game and prepare me that food that I love so well and bring it to me that I may eat. Now, Rebekah was listening to this, and so when he went to the field to hunt the game, Rebekah told Jacob what was going on and said, bring me game and I'll make the food that Isaac loves, and you can give it to him, pretend to be Esau, and he will give you the blessing. Jacob protested. He said, well, look, Esau is hairy and I'm smooth-skinned, and probably Isaac's going to feel, and he's going to feel that, and he's going to know that I'm deceiving him, and he'll curse me rather than bless me. But Rebekah said, no, I will take care of that. I have a plan. And so he did as she said. She made the food. She took Esau's clothes, put them on Jacob. She put some goat skins on his hands and the smooth part of his neck, and she sent him in to see Isaac. And when he came to him, he said, my father. And he said, here am I. Who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I'm Esau, your firstborn. So he deceived him. I have done as you've told me. Please arise, sit, and eat. And so Isaac has questions. How'd you find it so quickly? And he did. He asked him to come near so that he could feel him and make sure that it's really Esau. And he says, the voice is Jacob's, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he didn't recognize him. And so he ate the food and he blessed Jacob, thinking he was Esau. Of course, you know the story. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob and Jacob had gone away, Esau came in with the food that he had prepared. And Isaac said to him, who are you? And he said, I'm Esau, your firstborn. And at that point, Isaac realizes he's been deceived here. And Esau pleads with him to bless me also. But Isaac said, your brother came with deceit and has taken away your blessing here. And that's when Esau says, is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and now he's taken away my blessing. And then he said, have you not reserved a blessing for me? And Isaac answered and said, indeed, I've made him your master and all his brethren. And Isaac did offer a blessing of sort. Behold, your dwelling shall be that of the fatness of the earth and of the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. And it shall come to pass, when you become restless, that you shall break his yoke from your neck. We tend to see in this story Rebekah and Jacob in a really bad light, but it's probably not as black and white as it seems. Esau, as we've seen, had married these 2 pagan women here, and Esau had not honored the birthright here. So he shares some of the blame. It's kind of a sordid story, really, and it's going to have some long-term implications, because at the end of chapter 27 it tells us that Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, and then I will kill my brother Jacob. And when Rebekah heard about this, she called Jacob and said, surely Esau is intending to kill you. So arise, flee to my brother Laban in Haran, and stay with him a few days until your brother's fury turns away. Well, what Rebekah didn't understand, she was sending Jacob away, and she would not see him again. So part of the deceit and the sordid nature of all that has transpired here we see the effects there. Jacob is forced to leave home, and despite her hoping that it's only going to be a few days, she never saw him again. And Jacob, who cheated Esau out of the blessing here, as we'll see next week, he's going to be deceived by his uncle Laban here. So that it's a remarkable kind of a story there, but we do see God had foretold the younger would rule over the elder, and we see that coming to pass here as Jacob gets the birthright and the blessing. What do we learn from all this? It's not just a story about a good brother and a bad brother, but it's more a story about a righteous God and his sinful people. The sinful struggle between the parents and the brothers eventually became a family rift, but through it all, God remained righteous and faithful, and he redeemed even the moral failures that we see exhibited here. And we know that we all struggle with sin, and we are commanded to seek God's righteousness, live by faith in Jesus Christ. It's often tempting to rush to find ourselves in the biblical narrative, comparing ourselves to biblical figures and heroes, and overlook the one who has authored the story. Because the Bible, first and foremost, is a story about God and the sovereignty of God. We know that our tendency towards sin exists because of our sin nature that corrupts our hearts and desires. We might be led by greed and envy or cravings and lust, but either way, in our sin, we substitute ourselves in the place of God, seeking our interests without regard for God's will and ways. So, because of that, we had to have a Savior who can free us from our sinful ways and restore us to a proper relationship with God our Father. Jesus is that Savior, and He's the fulfillment of all the promises that God made here to Abraham and to Isaac, and as we'll see next week, to Jacob. For all the sins of favoritism, manipulation, and selfishness that we see in this narrative, Isaac and Rebekah began with a couple of righteous acts. They prayed and they inquired of the Lord, and they sought His will and comfort in the midst of their distressing circumstances. We should do the same. Come back next week and we'll move on and study more about Jacob and more about the relationship between Jacob and Esau. Thank you.